Sorry I had to take an extended hiatus. Been having trouble with my blood sugar and stuff. But anywho, we're back now into the groove, and it is the 2nd of June. What the hell? Okay, anyway, we're going to move along now in The Reaper and the Scribe, chapter 51, and thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope to do a good job for you, and I very much, Paul and me, appreciate your being here and joining us in our adventure. The builders had all but finished the new police station, with only a couple of days decorating to do. Acting Chief Inspector Harry Scrivens was sitting at his desk, willing the phone to ring. This must be the most boring place I have ever been, he thought, as Police Officer Stephen Biggs brought him his afternoon coffee. He looked at his watch, and although it had seemed hours since he last checked the time, a mere 15 minutes had passed. Doesn't anything ever happen here, Biggs? Inquired Scrivens. We have just had to call the fire brigade out, sir, answered P.O. Biggs. Ooh, what's the problem? Asked Scrivens, thinking his day was picking up. Mrs. Jenkins from West Grange Road called. Her cat's gotten stuck up in the tree again, sir, replied this police officer. Harry Scrivens let his head fall forward onto the desk, moaning quietly. Are you all right, sir? Shall I call a doctor? Inquired Biggs. A doctor? And the fire brigade? In the same day? My God, man! The front desk will think it's Armageddon, said Scrivens, without lifting his head. P.O. Biggs just shook his head at the ignorant quip, he being one of the survivors of the devastation. Harry Scrivens heard the door close and raised his head. Was it something I said? His thoughts then turned once again to Chief Inspector Paul Johnson's locked bottom drawer. What was inside, and how could he get it without Johnson knowing? Just then his phone rang. It was P.O. Linda Harper. We have just had another call from Mrs. Edwards. Mrs. Edwards? Who's she? Asked Scrivens. She is the woman from Dale Avenue, sir, answered P.O. Harper. Oh, lovely. What does she want, apart from a personality transplant? He asked disdainfully. It's the hole in her garden, sir. It's growing, and she fears something will get out and ravage her. Ravage her? Run away, more like. I'll get my jacket. Meet me downstairs, said Scrivens, placing his arm through the sleeve of his jacket. On the way to Dale Avenue, P.O. Harper informed her superior that Chief Inspector Paul Johnson's new desk was arriving that very day. For what reason does he need a new desk? His is perfectly adequate, asked Scrivens. It's a present from Atkinson, Dewhurst, and Smith, and today is the only day it could be delivered. Evidently it's a beautiful antique oak desk, said P.O. Harper. police officers getting gifts from the public. That could be misinterpreted. Oh, no, sir. It's part of the citywide gratitude for the chief inspector, replied Harper. This is most curious, said Scrivens. What is, sir? Asked Harper. What can a place that is so boring possibly want to thank the police for? Inquired the acting chief inspector. Maybe that's the very thing, sir. Chief Inspector Paul Johnson and his predecessor, Jack Thompson, kept a very tight rein on things, offered the P.O. Oh, no, it's more than that. A cruise, ornate desks. What's going on here? Mused Scrivens. I don't know what you mean, sir. Chief Inspector Johnson has worked flat out since the devastation without taking a break, and the city is thankful for that. He regained law and order in this town after all the looting and lawlessness took place, retorted P.O. Harper. That may be so, but here was no different to anywhere else. The devastation was worldwide, Scrivens said. With respect, sir, we were at the epicenter of the devastation. Our town was left with one untouched building. It had to be totally rebuilt, and the survivors of that one building and the city council were grateful for all the work we put in to get it back to where it is today. It really is no deeper than that, answered P.O. Harper as they turned into Dale Avenue and stopped at the house in question. Upon leaving the vehicle, they made their way around to the back, where the hole was, and indeed it had increased in size. The acting chief inspector and the police officer could not get close to it. In fact, they stood a full 12 feet further back than the last time they were there. What is going on here? You don't think it's a fissure from the volcano, do you, Harper? Asked Scrivens. Well, if it is, sir, don't you think we'd better organize an evacuation of this entire area? Asked P.O. Harper. I do indeed, and that's good thinking on your part. It will be duly noted, said Scrivens. Thank you very much, sir, answered the pleased police officer. We shall go back and organize the evacuation now, said the acting chief. The Aurora was now in heavy seas. The storm had grown in wind strength and was almost upon them. Chief Inspector Paul Johnson looked at Dixie's worried expression as she observed the storm through the cabin window. You look worried, my dear, said Johnson. No, I'm not worried. I've fought these before, was Dixie's quick reply. Fought? Whatever do you mean? Asked Johnson. Sorry, did I say fought? I've seen these storms before. The chief's right eyebrow rose as his expression changed, and he said, If there is something I need to know, please tell me, or I won't know how to deal with it when it happens. Dixie turned to look at him and said, He knows what we are doing. Who knows? Asked Paul. Atkinson, she said. I know. I've known all along that Atkinson knew I was retrieving his body parts. I don't know why, I just did. said Johnson in a comforting voice. Not Atkinson Junior. His father, Atkinson Senior. You know, Dewhurst's partner, informed Dixie solemnly. I see, said Johnson. What is the plan, then? And I take it this storm is not a natural one, he continued. No, it isn't. When we are on dry land, the elementals can only get to us via the special phones that high-ranking immortals carry. But that won't do them any good, because they would perish at an immortal's touch, or they would arrive through the old portal. Out at sea, there is a different kind of danger. Creatures from the depths of the ocean, the likes of which humankind has never seen, and Atkinson controls them, informed Dixie. Come now, surely we're not talking about the Kraken, said a disbelieving chief inspector. You have a problem believing in things that aren't black and white. Yet you have just returned from Egypt, where you were a pharaoh from 4,000 years ago, she said. Point taken, replied Johnson. The thing is, where do you think these stories come from? Before humankind found true intelligence, they could be scared by things like winged horses, dragons, and all the other so-called mythological creatures. I was around in those days, and believe me, Atkinson had early humankind right where he wanted them, living in fear. So all in all, mythology is one of your words. It's not one of mine. For the record, the Kraken is not a giant squid-like creature. She is a beautiful but deadly mermaid, and is controlled by Mother Nature. In answer to your question, no, I didn't mean the Kraken. Right then. Now I have been educated. What do I do when whatever it is out there begins to attack? Asked Johnson. You will hide in a safe place, whilst Vincent and I see them off. I am not used to hiding from danger, he retorted. You are mortal. You cannot survive against these demons, she informed in the strongest manner. Begrudgingly, the chief inspector took on board his traveling partner's advice. He was to stay in the room with Vincent, and Vincent was only to answer the door to her. As she left the cabin, she looked back at Johnson and gave him a reassuring smile. As he returned the smile, it hid the feelings he had building up inside of him for this strange but wonderfully forceful girl. Back on dry land, Tom Harper had arrived back at work after having, for him, an unusual morning off. Hey, Gavin, I'm back, announced Tom. Hello, Tom, answered Gavin. Hello, Tommy, shouted Sarah from another room. What are you doing in the instrument room? Inquired Tom. Cleaning, answered Sarah. Oh, God, exclaimed Tom as he ran into the instrument room. On entering, he stopped in his tracks as Sarah was leaning over the table, polishing it. Her very small miniskirt was riding high up on her bum, showing her polka-dot patterned knickers. "Where's your white coat, Sarah?" asked an embarrassed Tom. "It was in my way. I can't move properly in it," replied an impish Sarah. Tom turned his head, murmured a few choice words to himself, and left the room. 2 or 3 minutes later, Sarah came out, properly attired, in her white coat, and said, "It's okay, Tom. I'm used to having that effect on the opposite sex. In fact, Gavin's the only guy who has ever looked twice at me." "There's nothing wrong with the way you look, Sarah. You are a beautiful young girl. It's just, well, beautiful young girls in pink polka-dot knickers just don't do it for me." "That's okay, Tommy. I understand. What color do you like?" asked Sarah. Tom couldn't help but laugh. "You silly girl. How can I say this? It's not the color. I rather like pink." "Oh," said Sarah with a puzzled look on her face. Tom saw the confusion in his poor assistant's face and said, "Sarah, I'm gay." Sarah just looked at him and smiled sweetly. "I see. So all this time we've worked together, you haven't been thinking that I'm ugly. It's just 'cause you like boys," said Sarah. "Of course you're not ugly. And yes, my preferences are different to most men. I shall have to introduce you to my friend John Smith," said Sarah. "Why?" asked the now worried Tom. "I think he's gay," answered Sarah. "No thanks, Sarah. That's okay. I'm too busy to have a varied personal life. Anyway, just because someone is gay doesn't mean I'll get on with him. The same applies to me as it does to you. It's not the fact that Gavin is straight that made you fall in love with him. It was because, and God knows how, but you two are compatible." "Do you have a boyfriend, Tom?" asked Sarah. "No, I have told you I don't have time," he retorted. "What kind of boys do you like, Tommy?" inquired Sarah. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, beginning to feel quite uncomfortable with the conversation. Sarah opened her mouth to say something else when Gavin arrived. "That's quite enough, Sarah. Leave poor Tom alone," he said. Tom was relieved at Gavin's timely intervention and took the opportunity to go and get ready for work. Gavin took Sarah by the hand and said, "Fancy a spot of lunch?" Sarah smiled and nodded. "The place is yours for an hour, Tom. Enjoy the quiet," announced the coroner. "Oh, I will," said Tom, putting some Mozart on the CD player. On the way out to the car, Sarah informed Gavin that she had a secret. "Go on, tell me your secret," coaxed Gavin. "I can't. It's a secret," replied Sarah. "Okay," said Gavin, knowing that would totally frustrate her. "Well, if you must know," she said. "No, Sarah, if it's a secret, you'd better keep it to yourself," said Gavin. Sarah just sat there, bursting to tell Gavin her secret. Okay, then, if you must know, Tommy's gay, said Sarah triumphantly. That's your secret? Inquired Gavin. Yeah, said Sarah, sporting a smug face. I know, said Gavin. Huh. Okay, Mr. Clever Clogs. How do you know? Asked Sarah. Gavin just smiled and said, Tom and I do have conversations, you know, and in fact it was he that brought the subject up so that we could set out on an even keel. What's one of them then? Asked Sarah, with her arms folded. Again, Gavin smiled and said, I love you. It means in this case we started with no secrets. But as I told him, my staff's personal life, sexual orientation, color, creed does not matter at all, as long as they do their job, which, I might add, he does superbly. They're fine by me. Ooh, and by the by, my mother phoned this morning. She wants us to go down there for the weekend and discuss the wedding plans. You don't have anything arranged for us, do you? Nope, we are free all weekend, replied Sarah with a beaming smile. Gavin's facial expression suddenly changed, and Sarah asked him what was wrong. I have to be at the gateway, announced Gavin. His wife-to-be said, In that case, Gavin, pull over, think of the gateway, and you'll change as you arrive. Her beautiful man disappeared in front of her. On reappearing, he found himself inside the hole on Dale Avenue as the magnificent sentinel. Looking about him, he saw many pairs of eyes staring in his direction. Through the fire and the flames, he drew his mighty sword and stood at the entrance. Come forth, all who will, but die you must, for I am the sentinel of this gateway, and not one of you shall survive this day, was the sentinel's war cry. The amassed hordes of ghoulish elementals rushed towards him, all screaming en masse. The sentinel stood his ground as the first wave approached. Detective Inspector Scrivens and P.O. Harper arrived back at the police station to the news that the hole was now making a very loud, rumbling sound. I was expecting that, said D.I. Scrivens. We have to evacuate that entire area. Get everyone you can out there and begin the evacuation. I'm going to get the army to help. The acting chief inspector went upstairs to his office 2 steps at a time, rushed to his desk, picked up the phone, and asked to be put through to the nearest army headquarters. The desk sergeant rang him back and patched him through. Once connected, after a brief conversation about what was happening, the officer at the base told him he would get things underway. The army and the police would rendezvous at the large park on Roundy Road. It had been agreed that the park would be a safe place to organize the evacuation from. The acting chief inspector agreed and went back downstairs to see if the desk sergeant had things under control. He had already dispatched his officers to the area in question and had police cars driving around, alerting people as to what was happening. "At least the press hasn't got a hold of this yet," said Scrivens. "What press?" replied Glenn Simpson, the desk sergeant. "Oh, yeah, I've forgotten about that." By the time Scrivens and his police officers arrived at the rendezvous point, the army was already there in force. Acting Chief Inspector Scrivens shook hands with his army counterpart, Major Henry Walters, D.S.O., who had pretty much figured out a plan and had already put it into action. "Hope you don't mind, but I didn't think we had time to waste," said Walters, quite officially. "No problem. As you say, we don't have a lot of time. This could blow at any minute." The police and the army began their evacuation of the area surrounding Dale Avenue, not really knowing what was going on there. The loudspeakers fitted to the police cars were informing the residents to be ready for transport. Some of them started leaving of their own accord, which on one hand blocked part of the road, but on the other meant there were less people to evacuate. The information about the imminent danger from the volcano fissure made it really easy to get people out of their homes and into transport, and the whole process was completed with consummate ease. The evacuees were placed into tents erected by the army within Roundy Park until things were put into place, whereupon they would go to sport and leisure centers until the danger had passed and the all clear had been given. In the other realm, Atkinson had given the order for his minions to push through the old portal. Dewhurst sat in his chamber, watching everything begin to unfold. He wanted an end to all of this, and the rest he believed he richly deserved, but he knew that Atkinson was powerful and would not be unseated from his throne easily. In the quiet solitude of his chamber, he wondered if the challenge set was too great. Atkinson wielded powers beyond human imagination and seemed to be invincible. Was this all folly, or was Atkinson's son really the chosen one, as told in the beginning of time? Dewhurst rose from his chair, vacated his chamber, and visited his vast library. Upon removing the oldest book from its shelf, he placed it upon the lectern. He began to skip through its ancient pages, and for the first time in his existence, he looked up the full prophecy. The pages showed all that had happened up until that point, documenting his own fight with Atkinson, the reuniting of the two daughters, the triumphant death of Atkinson's son, and John Smith taking his place. There was also a strange reference to a girl being sent back in time to help. Then it read, "These are the signs of the new tomorrow. When all this has taken place, only then can things change, and the chosen young will replace the tired old," with a reference to the new sun burning bright. This was not the convincing end that Dewhurst was looking for, because this could have many endings, as only he had described himself as being tired. Atkinson could go on forever. If Atkinson killed his son, and the young reporter killed Dewhurst, Atkinson would have free hands to do as he wanted, and the one who took Dewhurst's place would spend an eternity being Atkinson's slave. No, things didn't seem as clear-cut as he once thought. He was now left with a dilemma. Did he carry on and hope the prophecy ends with Atkinson Junior and Jeff as Reaper and Scribe, or go along with Atkinson and try to mend the rift, hoping he'd change his mind about the humans? Deep inside a burning hole on Dale Avenue stood the sentinel, blood dripping from his sword. Thousands of elementals lay slain all around him. His face showed no emotion, only the expression someone wears after a job well done. He picked up one of the dead creatures and wiped the blood from his sword with it. He knew the danger had passed, so he returned to the driver's seat of his car. Only seconds had passed since he had disappeared. He smiled at a worried-looking Sarah and said, "Chin up. Everything's okay now, and I'm ready for my lunch." Sarah smiled, reached over, and kissed Gavin on the cheek. The couple then drove off to their luncheon date and the quiet solitude of their favorite little pub. The captain of the Aurora was called back to the bridge. On entering, he was pleased to see that the sea was perfectly calm, and all the instruments were working normally again. On the main deck, Dixie stood holding onto the rail, awaiting her foe. The ship was pitching and rolling in the heavy seas as she saw the first creatures climbing aboard. The rain was lashing at her face, and the howling wind was blowing the deck chairs all around her. The captain of the vessel was as confused as the rest of his officers as to what had happened to the instruments, as the day had turned into one of the nicest days of the cruise so far. He looked on the main deck and saw passengers in swimsuits basking in the sun. With thunder and lightning flashing all around her, Dixie changed into her warrior mode. Her backbone began to protrude through her skin. Her wings grew, stretching outward fully. She grew in stature as her shining armor reflected the flashes of lightning. The winged helmet covered her long red hair, but it fell loosely from under its brim and down over her shoulders. She drew her broadsword and ran to meet her oncoming foes. The captain said, "Well, as the sea is a mill pond, I'm going to retire for a while to my cabin." The driving wind and the waves crashing over the bows made the deck slippery, especially as the ship was pitching and rolling. The sea creatures rushed towards Dixie, green in color and very thin, with gills in between their ribs. They were covered in scales, which also reflected the lightning. With webbed feet and hands, and dorsal fins on their backs, they had large mouths that were unable to open very wide. Each had only one mindset: to kill, move on, and kill again. Before long, the whole deck was full of these creatures, and as the battle commenced, Vincent arrived, himself 8 feet tall, brandishing a huge hammer. He was also wearing full war armor. This new team fought hard against the sea creatures. Although the creatures were many and seemed at one point to have the upper hand, the two seemed to be holding their own, and were now making inroads as their enemies were carved by Dixie and crushed by Vincent. Corpses were strewn across all decks as the lightning lit the entire sky. Thunder increased in volume, and yet still more were climbing over the sides of the ship. They seemed to be never ending. Vincent shouted, "There are too many! We can't do this!" Dixie screamed at him to hold his ground and fight. Although Dixie and Vincent battled as hard as they could, more and more enemies were coming over the sides when the loudest crack of thunder and strongest flash of lightning hit the decks, dispatching scores of the creatures in an instant. When Dixie's blinded eyes returned to normal, she saw Tamara standing where the huge lightning bolt had hit. She stood there in full battle regalia, unsheathed her sword, and with one mighty sweep sent every last one of the creatures back from whence they came. Dixie and Vincent, although magnificent by anyone's standards, were in awe of this historical immortal after seeing her in action. The battle was now over. Tamara raised her arms into the air and screamed, "Begone!" As she did so, the clouds gathered into a whirlwind, then diminished as calm returned. The warrior goddess turned and looked at Dixie. "Where is Johnson?" she asked. "I locked him in his room," replied Dixie, with her head bowed. "You left him alone?" retorted Tamara. "I was left with him," replied Vincent. "Then why are you out here?" demanded an angry Tamara. "I thought Dixie needed help," answered Vincent. "You are not here to think. You should have only left if Dixie fell. You endangered Johnson's life. You fool! You will not let me down again!" Tamara once again raised her arms, and electricity could be seen between her hands. She brought her arms down and pointed them at Vincent. A lightning bolt came crashing from her hands and incinerated him where he stood. Calmly, she turned to Dixie. "Now, Dixie, I hope you don't let me down. The sentinel has just laid to waste thousands of these elementals on his own. It is your job to protect Johnson. Now do so, or Vincent's fate will be yours. Dixie, with her head bowed, told Tamara she would not let her down. "Take me to him, now!" ordered Tamara. As they went inside, Tamara noticed wet, webbed footprints across the floor. She looked at Dixie, then they both ran down the corridor. Dixie ran fastest and reached the cabin first to find it was open. To her dismay, one of the creatures had slipped by her and Vincent, and it had hold of Chief Inspector Johnson. His pained expression was plain to see as the creature grasped him by the neck. Dixie grabbed hold of the thing's head and ripped it away from its body. The creature's lifeless hands released the chief inspector, and both the creature and Johnson fell to the ground. "Nice timing," he croaked. "Thank you," said Dixie as she lifted him up in her arms. Johnson suddenly realized he was being cradled by a giant woman, and Tamara was watching on in full warrior mode. "Dixie and Vincent almost let harm come to you. I will replace them both," said Tamara. "No!" said Johnson. "She's just saved me. I want her with me. Always," he confessed. Tamara lifted an eyebrow in her certain way and said, "A lowly worker such as Dixie cannot possibly mix with you. You are too important to us," she said. Dixie lowered her head and looked sad. "So I had better sort out some kind of promotion for when you return the chief inspector back to his office safely." This brought a smile to Dixie's face as she looked into Johnson's eyes. Tamara noticed the look of love that Dixie bestowed upon the man and said, "I see you have your own reasons for wanting him to be safe." Dixie blushed as she took hold of Johnson's hand and said with her head bowed, "Yes, my lady." For the first time, Dixie saw Tamara smile as she said, "Do a good job, Dixie, and this domain that the chief inspector resides in shall be yours." Dixie knelt down upon one knee and kissed Tamara's hand. Johnson looked at Tamara and said, "You've come a long way since you were John Smith's attorney." Tamara laughed and said, "If you think as much of Dixie as she does of you, you will bring me the rest of the boxes as quickly as possible." With that, Tamara disappeared, and upon the horizon was the next port of call, shrouded in mist. "We have to be careful now, Paul. Atkinson Senior could intervene at any time whilst we are retrieving these boxes," Dixie advised. The countdown had begun at N.A.S.A. The finest brains on the planet were working together for the first time in human history to save their world. The approaching asteroid was probably too big to destroy, so the plan had to be to alter its trajectory. After much argument, the scientists came up with the correct distance from Earth the asteroid had to be when the missiles should strike. It was a window of 36 hours from the farthest point it could be hit to the nearest point, and still have enough time to maneuver the giant asteroid to pass by the Earth. The further away it was, the better chance they had at moving it. It had been calculated when each different missile should lift off so that all would converge at the same time. They knew they only had to shift the asteroid a fraction, so by the time that it reached Earth, it would have passed by with thousands of miles to spare. All of the coordinates were passed to every missile silo around the world. In this unprecedented event, every missile capable of leaving the stratosphere was fed the coordinates for their Earth-saving spaceflight. Each different type of rocket would travel at different speeds, so those differences had to be calculated, and thus the order of fire would be a staggered one, so that there would be a steady stream of blast-offs between the first and the last. The time between the first and the last would be 16 hours, the slowest blasting off first, and the latest, fastest ones last. Would the scientists get their minute movement of the asteroid? No one really knew for sure, but it was the only path that could be taken to save the Earth from total destruction. Jeff Clark sat in his room like any young man of his age would, but his was not the carefree look of someone with their whole life in front of them. He wore the furrowed brow of a man with much on his mind. Opposite to where he sat was a box on the bedside cabinet. He felt so desperately alone. His life had become dark, a life of grief, solitude, with the burden of the world upon his shoulders. All he could do was stare at this 12 by 12-inch box made of skin. His mind wandered from its dark course as he heard Cindy's sweet voice. "Hello, Jeff. I am here for you, my love." A tear fell down Jeff's cheek as he closed his eyes. "I wish you were here, but I know this is my imagination." "I am with you, Jeff. Everything is okay. I will always be with you." Tears were now flowing freely down Jeff's cheeks as he heard the sweet voice of his beloved Cindy. "I want all this to stop. I want to be back at work with you, living our life," said Jeff out loud. "Be still, my prince, for there is work for you to do." "I know, but how will I achieve what they want me to do?" asked Jeff. "The time is almost upon us, my darling. If you need me, just call out to me." Then the beautiful, sweet voice was just an echo that his ears were desperately trying to cling on to. Jeff opened his eyes, and to his horror, two ghostly figures stood in front of him. After the initial shock, Jeff said, "Don't tell me you are the ghosts of Christmas doom." One of them was a full-body apparition, and clearly Dewhurst. The other was in shadow. The voice you just heard was that of your loved one. I have made it possible for there to be contact between the two of you. This I have done for you alone. I need a commitment from you. You must stop this moping around and get on with what you must do, instructed Dewhurst. Who is your friend? Is this someone else I must kill? Because you really have the wrong guy, quipped Jeff. Silence! Screamed Dewhurst. Jeff sat back with a start. Sorry, said Jeff, with panic in his voice. There is much to be done, little fellow, said the other apparition. Who are you? Asked Jeff. The shadowy ghost removed his hood and revealed himself as Atkinson Junior. This was once again a shock for Jeff as he caught his breath. Relax, Jeff. I am not here for revenge. I need to set things right. I must remove my father from his position. I cannot do this on my own, and only you can help me. You murdered two of my friends! How can I trust you? Screamed Jeff. Jeff, things had to be done and seen to be done for all of this to take place. Do you think I really enjoyed being stabbed in the temple, only to come back and be slain and dismembered, just to prove to my father that his throne was safe? No, Jeff, that was real pain, and I was living on a knife edge. Had my father known what I was doing, I would have been terminated, and the world that you people know would no longer be here. I'm not asking for your trust. We have time to work that one out. I need you to work with me just as soon as I am pieced back together. Jeff hung his head and said, firstly, to Dewhurst, I can have Cindy with me? Dewhurst nodded his head, and then to Atkinson Junior, do you really think that I can do this? Atkinson Junior nodded. In that case, then, where do we start? The two ghosts disappeared, and where they had been standing now perched the open 12 by 12-inch skin box. Jeff moved toward the box, peering into its interior. He placed his hand inside and grasped the hilt of a sword. He wrapped his fingers around its ornate handle and retracted it from the box. It was a mighty sword, as tall as himself. He quickly laid it upon the bed as his knees were buckling. Turning back to the box, he saw it had disappeared. In its place was a suit of armor, which looked as if it were for a giant and far too big for him. "Let's get you changed to see if it fits," said Cindy as she walked into the room. "Cindy!" screamed Jeff. "It's true! You are here with me!" "I will be with you forevermore now, Jeff," she said. Jeff just gazed at her in total amazement. "So, all this is true?" asked Jeff. "Oh, yes. But there is much to be done, Jeff. I need you to think of Tamara." "Tamara? Why?" asked Jeff. But as soon as he mentioned her name, he was transported to the offices of Atkinson, Dewhurst, and Smith. "Hello, Scribe," said Tamara, bowing her head. I don't want any of that sir stuff or head bowing," answered Jeff. "It is something you will have to get used to when you take Dewhurst's place." Jeff suddenly realized he was wearing the armor and was very tall as he caught his reflection in the window. "I met Atkinson Junior," said Jeff. "Did all go well with the meeting?" inquired Tamara. "Yes, it did," replied Jeff with a growing confidence he had never experienced before. "Tea, old chap?" inquired John Smith. "Why, yes, please," replied the scribe-elect. The armor Jeff was wearing felt strange and uncomfortable. "Think change," said Tamara. "Change?" said Jeff. As soon as the word was said, he was back in his familiar T-shirt and jeans. "So you are with us, Jeff," said Tamara. "Yes, I am, and Cindy is with me too." "We know," said John Smith. "Why didn't you tell me before?" inquired the young reporter. "You had to accept your fate before you could know about Cindy, or you would have accepted for the wrong reason, and then you would have faltered," replied the Reaper. "I see," said Jeff. The meeting came to a close. Jeff thought of home and found himself sitting back on his bed, but with a new outlook. The hour was late in the main office of the old Tudor building. Tamara was writing her latest list. John Smith was readying himself for the realm of death when the apparition of Atkinson Junior appeared in the office. Tamara smiled as her long-time lover's ghostly form was taking more of the shape of the god that she knew so well. "Good evening, Atkinson," said John Smith. "The newsboy is on board?" asked Atkinson. "Yes, he was here in full armor," replied Tamara, "And what of our quest?" he inquired. "Your father knows of it," said John Smith. "That is very unfortunate," said Atkinson, "but not entirely unexpected." "They are about to dock to retrieve the third box," informed Tamara. "Excellent. With each part retrieved, I feel a little stronger," said Atkinson Junior. "I feel the time drawing near," he continued. "Be patient, my love," smiled Tamara. "How is it that you haven't fallen for Tamara's charms, Smith?" asked Atkinson Junior. "Be careful how you answer that one, John," warned Tamara. "The truth will have to be dealt with if we are indeed to work together," replied John. "Truth?" said Atkinson Junior. "The reason why Tamara's charms don't work on me is because I am like that poor boy you mutilated. I'm gay." Atkinson Junior looked puzzled, with an expression that clearly showed he wasn't privy to the term gay used in this fashion. "It means homosexual," said Smith proudly. Atkinson Junior looked shocked, and he was speechless for a few moments. "How can this be?" asked Atkinson as he looked at Tamara. "Because, my love, in this day and age, most of us have come to terms with the word equality. A lot has happened in the 22 years you were away. There are a quiet majority of people who accept other people for who they are. John is no different to you, my love. He just has different sexual preferences, and that is how things should be. Some of the greatest steps forward in humanity towards anything that isn't the norm have taken place in your absence. You must change your medieval ideas if you are to run this company, and to be aware there is a common thought that the ones who are most against homosexuality are uncertain of their own," said Tamara, as the corner of her lip curled ever so slightly upward. Atkinson Junior looked confused and said, "Keep me up to date with the cruise." And then he promptly disappeared. Tamara and John looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. At the coroner's office, Sarah was driving poor Tom mad by saying the word "why" every time he said something. In Gavin's office, the phone rang. To his surprise, it was Chief Inspector Paul Johnson. "My dear fellow, you are supposed to be on holiday," said Gavin. "Yep, I know. I was just wondering how things are back there." "How come you didn't ring the police station?" asked Gavin. "Because I would get the 'everything is running smoothly' routine," said Johnson. "Fair enough," said Gavin. "Well, your temporary replacement had a shaky start, but he seems to be okay now. The police have evacuated the southern part of town for fear of the volcano erupting," he continued. "What?" exclaimed Johnson. "It's okay. It's not the volcano. It was Atkinson's army trying to get through an old portal, but they were stopped," comforted the coroner. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" asked Johnson. "How you are doing is far more important than what is happening here. How's it going?" replied Gavin. "We're just docking on some small island, and it is misty, so this will be the third package. I'll be glad when this is all over," reported Johnson. At that, the two friends said their goodbyes as Johnson watched the Aurora dock. Gavin Jackson called Sarah into his office. "Is there something happening, Sarah?" inquired Gavin. "Good. You feel it too. We will be summoned soon," she replied. Upon her very words, both Sarah and Gavin were transported to Tamara, instantly materializing in the Reaper's office at Atkinson, Dewhurst, and Smith. The Aurora docked, and 2 passengers alighted. The other passengers seemed to be unaware of the boat's docking. They just carried on, as if still at sea. Dixie turned to Paul Johnson and asked, "I wonder what is in that wonderful head of yours this time?" "We shall see," answered the chief inspector. Back in the old Tudor building, Tamara greeted Gavin and Sarah with a smile. John Smith and Jeff Clark were already in attendance. "I have gathered you all into this place so that we may discuss what we are going to be dealing with. I have never experienced Atkinson and Dewhurst in true battle mode, so I don't know what to expect. But I do know that Atkinson will hit us with all he has once he finds out. And find out he will. He will be fighting to save his existence, which will make him quite formidable. Dewhurst will not fight, so the only help we can hope to get from him is his non-participation. We can only defeat Atkinson when we have his son in full body." "Hear, hear!" interrupted Atkinson Junior as he appeared in the room. Tamara raised an eyebrow and carried on. "As we speak, Johnson is retrieving the 3rd box. Then we will have a head, torso, and 1 leg. Only when all 7 pieces are in place do we have his help. I want Sarah to listen out for Johnson or Dixie needing help. Atkinson has started using elementals, so Gavin, as soon as you get a strange feeling, act upon it right away. Only you and I have the power to stop them en masse." At this point, Atkinson Junior's apparition spoke. "Once I am reformed, the final battle will begin. Because when my last piece, my heart, is put in place, my father will know I live. He has seen how the end may take shape, so he has already put other things into place." "Other things in place?" repeated the sentinel. "Yes, Gavin. As we speak, there is a very large asteroid heading for Earth, but the scientists at N.A.S.A. are working on it. My father doesn't even know N.A.S.A exists. So for now, we can leave that to them. Oh, one other thing. Sarah, when the final battle does come, would you please refrain from killing me? This brought a much-needed spark of lightheartedness to the conversation. Tamara then continued. When and if we get to the point where Atkinson Junior is fighting his father, that is when you join in the fight, Jeff. At this point, Atkinson Junior again spoke. I will not call for you, Jeff, until I need you in place. I can't risk you getting hurt. You are the linchpin in all of this. You have to understand how important you are to all of us here. We have waited a long time for your arrival. Believe me, if you had arrived 200 years ago, the world would not be in the state it is in now. But together, we can all turn this around. And where do I fit into this plan? Asked John Smith. Reaping will still have to take place whilst Atkinson plots his next move on us. Dewhurst will be the scribe. We still have to maintain our prime directive, John, said Tamara. No matter what happens, John, you must not join me in that realm. There will already be my father, Dewhurst, Jeff, and myself within that place, which will make it unstable enough. If you join us, the effect could be catastrophic for us all. I am sure you remember what happened last time we met on the same plane. Oh, I remember it well, recalled John. As the mist began to clear, Paul, Johnson, and Dixie found themselves riding into Dodge City. Johnson was dressed in black, with 2 guns holstered on his hips. He wore a long duster coat and a black Stetson hat, and had 3 days' worth of stubble on his chiseled chin. Dixie was also dressed in black, but her clothes were figure-hugging, showing off her curves. Main Street was quiet and empty as they tied their horses outside the saloon. On entering, all heads turned their way. "What'll it be, stranger?" said a scruffy man behind the bar. "Whiskey," replied Johnson, trying to emulate Clint Eastwood. "What about the little girlie?" he queried. In that instant, the cigarette he was smoking had been shot out of his mouth. "No one calls me girlie," huffed Dixie, with smoke trailing from the barrel of her gun. The bartender's shaking hands poured 2 whiskeys rather tentatively into the unwashed glasses, his eyes bulging with fear. Everyone commenced to do what they were doing before she turned their heads. Johnson and Dixie drew up a couple of chairs and sat down. The sheriff, his star gleaming on his dusty chest, walked over to their table and said, "Normally, I'd be saying I don't want any trouble, but I already have it. I know who you are," he said, looking at Johnson. "Hell, I've had your picture on my wall ever since I've been the sheriff in this God-forsaken town." Under the table, Johnson's hand slowly embraced the handle of his gun, and his Colt revolver clicked. The sheriff gulped, but continued. We're all here because that Murphy gang has got us pinned down. They have guns on the roof, in the streets, everywhere. They have packed 5 crates of gold from the bank and are about to leave town with 'em. If you can stop 'em, you can ride out of town with one of them crates. No questions asked, and no posse following. Johnson's grip on his sidearm eased as he looked at Dixie. Dixie smiled and said, I reckon we can rid you of this vermin, as she spit some chewing tobacco into a nearby spittoon. Johnson placed both of his guns on the table and drew a handful of bullets from his belt. You ride with empty guns? Exclaimed the incredulous sheriff. I keep a bullet in each gun. I only need the one shot. I find it keeps me alert, grinned the man with the fastest gun ever to be unholstered in the West. How many are on the roofs? Inquired Dixie. There are 8, answered the sheriff. How many on the ground? Asked Johnson. There are 6, answered the sheriff. And how many robbing the bank? Queried Dixie. There are 8 in the bank as we speak, said the sheriff. Is that all of 'em? Asked Johnson. It's the entire gang, replied the sheriff. Well, by my reckoning, that is 22 in all. That gives us a spare bullet each, said Johnson, as he filled the last empty chamber of his second gun. I will see to the ones on the ground, said Dixie. I'll take the ones on the roofs, said Johnson. You want anything other than drink? Something to eat, perhaps? Asked the bartender. Save it for when we come back inside. We do our killing before high noon, said Dixie. Johnson and Dixie stepped out of the saloon as if they were leaving. As they walked into the street, a voice rang out from the rooftop. Drop your guns! Get back into the saloon! Johnson lifted the brim of his Stetson by slightly craning his neck back and looked up at the man giving the orders. Have you seen all of yours? He asked Dixie. Yep, she replied. Okay, said Johnson. Upon the word okay, 14 shots rang out in an instant, followed by a short silence and the sound of 14 dead bodies hitting the ground. The hand movements from Johnson and Dixie were like lightning, as they both swiveled their guns in flamboyant circles before reholstering them. As the last man fell from the roof, the rest of the gang ran from inside the bank. They saw their dead comrades on the ground and only 2 people standing in the street. Kill 'em! Shouted James Murphy, the gang leader. But no sooner had the words left his mouth when a bullet between his eyes silenced him forever. Instantaneously, the last of his gang was as dead as he, and the full Murphy clan, who had for years ruled the town with fear, were history. Johnson looked at Dixie and gave her a wink. "I enjoyed that," he quipped. Dixie smiled back, and shaking her head, she said, "Only one word. Boys." Johnson looked at the tall man wearing a top hat and a tape measure around his neck and said, "I make that 22 bodies. A good day for you, Undertaker." The Undertaker looked solemn and yet very, very happy. The rest of the townsfolk ran out of the saloon, along with the sheriff. They were all cheering and circled the couple. The wily old sheriff then said, "Well, I'm now faced with a dilemma." "What's that, Sheriff?" said Johnson. "Well, that Murphy gang's dead. So why do I need to give 2 outlaws one of these boxes?" said the sheriff. "Make that 23 boxes!" shouted Dixie to the Undertaker. "I've still got a bullet in my gun, and before you can even think of an answer, you will be boots up. So why don't I give you an extra second to rethink your plan?" said Johnson. The sheriff looked shocked, especially as both Johnson's and Dixie's guns were now pointed at his head, both with one bullet in the chamber. "What'll it be, Sheriff?" said Johnson, as his right fourth finger caressed the trigger. The sheriff, in total disbelief that they had not wasted one shot, put his hands up, and the box was given to Johnson in total silence. As soon as Johnson's hands gripped the box, it disappeared, along with Dodge City and all its inhabitants. The mist cleared, and the gangplank of the Aurora was in front of them. They stepped back on board, and soon were back at sea. In the main office of Atkinson, Dewhurst and Smith, the chest arrived and was quickly dealt with by Tamara. "As you can all see, the quest goes well," she said. Atkinson Junior's apparition smiled. "What will happen when the last box arrives?" asked the coroner. "We will be prepared to face Atkinson," said Tamara, looking at the strengthening Atkinson Junior. The more he materialized, the less harsh he looked, and the more he looked like the Atkinson Junior of old. And the bigger Tamara's smile grew. After a long discussion about the things to come, the first meeting proper of 6 of the 8 warriors came to an end. The other 2 members of this elite group were arm in arm, sailing back to sea midway through their cruise.